We also look at your essays. Now, the interesting thing to note about the essay is it's the one piece after this year that can still change, right? So your resume, you can't add on clubs that you haven't already done after this year. You can't go back and change grades. Sometimes you can change your test scores, but the essay is the one thing that's constantly moving and changing. So start thinking now about what you want to write about, because that's the one tangible piece that you can work with and kind of mold to fit your application to make it complete. That puzzle piece that's going to kind of finish it all off. Other things that schools might look at. So those were the basics. These are the extras. Okay, so we might look for something called demonstrated interest. So does anyone know what demonstrated interest is? Anyone want to guess? It's kind of self-explanatory. It's you demonstrating your interest in a school. So there are some schools that factor that into their admissions process, and it's part of the formula as to whether or not they're admitting students. For other schools, it's just helpful for us to see that you are interested in our school. Now, why do you think we might care if you're interested or not? Why does that matter? Right, you don't want to give a spot to someone who's not going to come. For some schools, there is a competitive process where they've only got a certain number of seats. And so they can't send out a ton of admission decisions because if they go over that number, they're overfilling their class. Now, in UT's case, we don't have a quota. That's not something we work with. But for us, if the situation ever came down to where we have a couple more beds left and we have 20 applicants and only 5 of them have ever shown us that they're interested in coming to UT, and everything else is the same amongst those applicants, right? The grades are the same, they've taken the same classes, the involvement's the same. We would probably pick those students who have come, because when we talk about yield, we don't ever want to not admit a student who could find their spot on our campus. We want to be sure that we're bringing in students who would be excited to be at our schools and would help us complete our class. The other thing that schools might look for are additional, do you have a question? That's a great question. So yeah, when we say demonstrated interest, that can be a number of things. It can be visiting campuses, it can be sending us emails, it can be logging into the accounts that you make with us. So when you apply to UT, I can see every time you've logged into your account. If I have 2 applicants, one of whom the last time they logged in was in September when they applied, and the other one has logged in once a week since then, that's demonstrating interest for us. Someone who comes to talk to us at college fairs, or someone who asks to sit down over coffee and meet with us. That would be ways to demonstrate interest. And it can be a range of things, but typically it's just you reaching out to the schools, letting them know that that's a place that you could see yourself. Additional applications and essays. So if you're applying to specific programs or more competitive majors at certain schools, you might have extra essays to do or extra applications. For example, if you apply to our architecture program at UT, there's an extra application and essay for that. If you are applying to schools that have a requirement to do the ACT or SAT with writing, that would be something you want to look for. Also look for whether or not they want SAT subject test scores. Those are more competitive schools that will ask for those. Rec letters are a part of the process. Possibly an interview with either an alumni or an admissions representative. Sorry, y'all. Portfolios, if you're applying to something where it's art-based or music-based, performance-based, you might have to do some sort of portfolio or audition for that program. So just keep those in mind, too, that those could be parts of the application process for you. Any questions so far? I'm almost done. Okay. All right, so talking a little bit about Tennessee Promise. So does everyone know what Tennessee Promise is? Yeah. So any high school senior from Tennessee is eligible to do Tennessee Promise. Now you can apply early in the fall of senior year, and different schools have different requirements for when you're going to confirm your spot in that program, depending on whether or not they're a TCAT, so Tennessee College of Applied Technology, whether they are a community college or a 4-year school that offers an associate's degree. But those are all the places that you could use Tennessee Promise. The other thing with Tennessee Promise is you've got other requirements outside of just applying. So there's a mentorship requirement, there's meetings you have to meet, and then there's a GPA requirement that you have to maintain while you're in school to get it. It covers tuition and fees, and Annie will talk more about kind of cost of Tennessee Promise, I'm sure. Yeah. But I bring this up because for a lot of students, there are 2 main points I want to make. The first thing is free doesn't necessarily mean that it's more valuable. So for a lot of 4-year schools, most of your scholarship money is going to come if you come in as a freshman, right? So not a lot of schools offer tons of money in transfer scholarships. So when you're looking at whether or not to do Tennessee Promise, you want to make sure that you're looking at your 4-year total, right? So the cost of attendance over 4 years, including the 4-year school you're going to transfer to after you get done with Tennessee Promise. Have I lost anyone yet? Because that was a mouthful. Okay. The other thing, though, is that just because it's free doesn't mean it's not valuable, right? So it doesn't mean that it's not a good program just because it's got that free price tag. So just keep in mind, there are community colleges like the Columbia State campus in Williamson County that are probably nicer than a lot of four-year school campuses and have incredible programs that they're going to be really well known for. So don't automatically discount it just because you think that because it's free, it can't be that good. All right, so timeline of when this typically happens. So August 1st is when most schools will open their applications. Now, one interesting thing to note is that the Common App right now, you can already start. You just can't submit it until after August 1st, but you could go to commonapp.org and go ahead and start working on the application, work on all the pieces, and then after August 1st, select your application year from a drop-down box. Makes it pretty easy. We also have different application deadlines. So for UT, our competitive application deadline is November 1st. That's going to be pretty standard. I think the earliest one might be October 15th for most schools. But just keep in mind that they're going to run throughout October, November, and December typically. The other thing is that the FAFSA now opens early, so that'll be early October. And those deadlines will also vary by school. So if anyone wants to take a picture of this, I'll scoot out of the way so you can look. This year, the Tennessee Promise FAFSA filing deadline was January 17th. Now, with Tennessee Promise, we always tell students to do all the requirements and stay on track to meet those requirements until you know for sure you don't need the program. An example of that is that UT has something called the Volunteer Bridge Program, where you would get an admission decision from us that says that you'll live on our campus, you'll be a UT student, but you're taking your classes that first year at Pellissippi State Community College in Knoxville. It's an admission decision. It's an invitation to be a student on campus, but your classes aren't going to be on our campus that first year. And with that program, you can use the Tennessee Promise Scholarship to cover your tuition and fees at Pellissippi State. So for a lot of students who maybe think that Tennessee Promise is not a good fit for them, that's still a way to use that to kind of get scholarship dollars. So meet all the requirements until you know for sure you don't need that. Decisions from schools will come on typically a rolling basis. Some schools, like the University of Florida, have one date in the spring where they send out every admission decision at one time. Know the differences between the schools that you're applying to and whether or not they've got some sort of decision date. And then the confirmation deadline, that's pretty standard too. So May 1st is going to be a nationwide confirmation deadline for you to decide where you're going to go. And typically, you have to put down a deposit somewhere by that date. Any questions? Okay. So right now, you should do a whole lot of things. But number one is finish the semester strong. So you want to make sure that you are finishing out junior year as best you can. Those grades need to be as good as possible because you can't change your grades after this point. Some schools might let you use your senior year grades in the process, but it just delays your decision timeline. So we want to make sure that you're in the best position right now for admission to the school that you want to go to. The other thing that I would do, and moms and dads, you can help with this part. Organize a list of colleges that you're thinking of applying to and kind of do like a notebook with a spreadsheet or a checklist. I would have all the deadlines listed, so deadlines for their early decision or early application, deadlines for the regular application, deadlines for scholarships, deadlines of when you should confirm, when you just send in financial aid information. I would put that all on a spreadsheet. It will make your life so much easier because you can upload all those dates into a calendar and keep them in one master spot so that you have a way to access that. I would also put application process information on there. So if the school has some sort of guaranteed requirement, maybe you could put on that spreadsheet what the ACT requirement is going to be. And then that way you know if your student isn't at the ACT requirement they need to meet, they can keep testing again up until the application's due. Work on your resume and your essays. Now with the resume, I always tell students to be as creative as possible. So a lot of students might be in a club like HOSA or DECA or Beta Club. How many of you in here are in one of those clubs? Really, no one? Okay, well then a different example, any club really that you're in might do some sort of volunteer experience or some community service work. So if you are in one of those clubs, you could put your involvement in the club on one part of your application and your resume and also put your volunteer experience on another part. You don't have to tell us that they're the same thing, right? Because you did them both. They were individual things. The volunteer experience might have come because you were in the club, but you still did it. So be as creative as possible. Also quantify as often as possible. So give us numbers, give us ways to picture things. Tell us how many hours you've spent doing something or how many years you've been involved, how many times a week you meet, how many different locations you've gone to for something. Yes, ma'am. That's a great question. Typically, she's asked if there's a standard form for college resumes. So typically, we don't actually take a resume. Usually, we have an application kind of laid out that tells you what to put where. So we'll ask for your activities and involvement, your extracurriculars, your part-time work experience, your volunteer work. Will be in different sections. Yes, ma'am. Any other questions? Okay. Also find people to write recommendations for you. 2 pieces of advice with the recommendation section of your application. Make sure that number 1, your recommender knows who you are, and make sure number 2, that they like you. Because I can't tell you how many recommenders have written letters before, and these are typically teachers who you maybe had freshman year that you never spoke with outside of class, but you couldn't think of someone else to write it, and you thought because they're an English teacher they'd write a really great recommendation. They'll say, this was a student I had in my class, and they scored this, and that's all they really say. So make sure that this is someone you have a relationship with. It can be an advisor. Schools will tell you whether they prefer for it to be a counselor or a teacher or someone who knows you on a personal level, but just make sure that those 2 check marks are kind of crossed off. Also start looking up scholarships, and I don't mean the scholarships from schools. I mean some external scholarships, some community-based scholarships. So there are a lot of different awards that are given out here in Middle Tennessee for students. Those are like Chamber of Commerce scholarships. Coca-Cola does one. There's all kinds of companies and corporations that have scholarships, and that's money that you can take anywhere, typically. So no matter what school you go to, it's your award when you're done with it. So it's not more valuable than the money you get from schools, but it's just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the money you get from schools. Because no matter what decision you make, that's something that you've earned and you get to keep in the process. Yeah. Great question. Yes, right. So applying for them doesn't mean you get them. There are typically some sort of requirements listed that you need to meet. But you can also be creative with those. So they'll tell you what the niche is. They'll tell you whether they want you to be from Williamson County and have gone to Brentwood High School. They'll tell you if they want you to be a female student majoring in aerospace engineering. Yeah, they'll list the specifics of what you need to meet typically. But those deadlines will start coming in the summer, and then they go throughout early fall and sometimes into the spring, but typically they're earlier because those are smaller committees of people here locally or at those corporations who are actually meeting to discuss whether or not to award those students a scholarship. So just keep that in mind too. And those you can find online. One tip that I would give too, and I know that your counselors are great about putting that information up, but I would also look at some other high schools' lists, just in case there's something that a local organization didn't send to Brentwood High School. You could see if there's another scholarship you could possibly apply for. I always used to tell students in Sumner County, if they went to Hendersonville High School, they could check Station Camp's website, because the counselor at Station Camp used to call people and say, I know you had a scholarship 2 years ago, can I have the information about it for this year? So she had a very thorough list. So just check around too and see if there's another place that's maybe got some of that information for you. Yeah. Annie, do you have those websites on your presentation or no? Yep, yeah, I think Zinch might have had them, or Zinch still does. Scholarships.com. Yeah, we can talk in a minute because I don't have them off the top of my head, but yeah. Yes, sir, yeah. Yep. They'll start before senior year. It's not for a lot of them, but for some of them. Some of the local ones, just because they want students to know if they're going to have that funding before they go into the application process. So they could start this summer. You're welcome. I would also sign up for the ACT and SAT in the fall. Now, something to keep in mind when you're looking at schools is there are 2 main types of ways that schools will take scores. There's your single highest composite score, so one test score or one test date, and then that composite happens to be your best. Other schools do what's called a super score, so UT is one of them, and that's basically where we take each of your best individual subject scores and make an average of those. So hypothetically speaking, if you took the test 4 separate times, and in one subject area each time you made a 30, and then every other score was a 15, like the first time 30 was in math, second time 30 was in English, third time 30 was in science, fourth time it was in reading, your super score would be a 30, even though your single highest composite for all those tests would probably be somewhere in the 20s. We don't recommend that you do that. That's not what we want you to do with the super score, but if you took the test again, say there's a subject area that you struggle in. Say you're not really great with math. You could just study for the math section and try to get it to a level that you're comfortable with to apply. So I would start looking at whether or not schools take that super score and sign up for the test. The other thing is your scholarship amounts can differ based on your test score. So even if you know you're admissible to a school, if they have that guaranteed requirement for the ACT or the SAT, a lot of times your scholarship qualification would go up, or what you qualify for money-wise would go up depending on what your score is. So you could keep testing and get more money to that school. And then I would go on campus tours, visit schools, like we said. You can do that here in Nashville. You can go visit out of state or even other parts of the state, and then do some ACT or SAT prep. And there's a lot of really cool free options online. The College Board does SAT prep online. There's also something called Khan Academy, Khan, completely free SAT prep. And the ACT has resources as well. But I would, even if you're not taking the SAT, I would do that prep because it's really helpful with both of the tests. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a great question. So in other parts of the country, the SAT is a more prominent test, but we're an ACT state, so we talk in terms of ACT more frequently. Yeah, it's a state thing, but Georgia, for example, is an SAT state. So that would be why those conversations are different, but all of our institutions know that, and we typically have a preference. Now, some more highly selective schools, I think, historically have been SAT schools, but they know that ACT is taking over in a lot of regions that are still competitive, so they will accept the ACT. But I would say, typically, whichever test you feel more comfortable with, I would stick with that test. And they're two very different tests. One is a little more analytical, and one's a little more subject-based, whether or not you know the material. So I would try them both if you can, if money is no issue, and see which one you like better. All right, and then the other thing you should be doing right now is asking questions. Not in here, I mean, yes, in here, but just in general. So ask admissions counselors, ask your guidance counselors, ask your teachers, ask your family, ask everyone questions, because it's a confusing process, and we know that. Every school does something different. Every school has different deadlines. Every school has different dates that do things. Some schools are ED schools, so early decision. Some schools are early action schools. Some schools have rolling admission. Now, quick breakdown of that. Early decision is an early application deadline that is binding. So that's typically your more competitive schools. They will have an ED date. It might be just one ED date, or they'll have an early decision 1 and early decision 2. Then they have a regular pool. And they'll tell you that most of their students they admit come from that early decision pool. The reason that is the same thing that we were talking about earlier, giving spots to students who they know are going to come. Because it's binding, you're required, or you sign a contract. So it's a requirement, but it's not a requirement, but it is. You sign a contract saying that you're going to attend that school. So keep in mind, you can typically only apply to one school early decision, because if you're admitted to both, you're kind of in a bind, because you're supposed to go to both of them. Early action is very different. So early action is just like a priority deadline. UT has an early action deadline. So that's typically going to be your scholarship or your competitive deadline. Regular decision is going to be just a regular application deadline. Typically, those don't qualify you for scholarships. Some schools, they might. Again, that would be where I'd ask questions. And then rolling admission means that they just accept applications throughout the year. So MTSU is one of those rolling admission schools. Technically, UT is, but we also advertise an early action application deadline, so that you can apply early and get lots of money to UT. All right, any questions? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So she was asking if you apply to schools that maybe just want your single highest composite, schools that don't super score, whether you should, when you sign up for the ACT, send them your score. That's going to be a question that you would want to ask those schools. I know that Vanderbilt, for example, uses the single highest composite. They don't super score. And that would be a question I would ask the rep for this area. So I don't know if it's Mary Beth or if it's Mary Comfort Stevens. Mm-hmm. That's a great question that yeah. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. For us, it wouldn't ever hurt you. It would never hurt to see that. And schools also know, too, that it's a senior level test. So when you take it, typically sophomore, junior year, you're not going to have taken the classes you need to score well on the test. So if you, without knowing that Vandy does that single highest composite, listed to send your scores there because it's your dream school and it's where you want to be, I don't think that they would count that against you. But if it was one of those things where every time you took it senior year, you decided to send your scores, that might be a different conversation. I'm not speaking on behalf of Vanderbilt because I'm not a rep of Vanderbilt and I don't want him to get me in trouble because it could be way different for them. But that would be a conversation I'd want to have with them, just to ask. That was a good question. You're welcome. All right, and then just the last slide, I promise. At least I think it is. Yep, last slide. Oh, go back. There we go. So a couple things to remember right now. Check your email. And one piece of advice for the email thing, what I would do, because a lot of parents want to be in the process, right? And we'll get to that in just a second too. But I would create a completely separate email account just for your college stuff. So like mine would be sammygoestocollege@gmail.com. The reason I say that is because every bit of information we send you comes through email. And if it's going to the student's email account, there's a good chance sometimes that might not be communicated with everyone or it might get lost in the mix. You might be, a student who's got accounts with like Nordstrom or Victoria's Secret Pink, or you're buying a cute bathing suit and then that's the only email you're looking for in your account. So you want to make sure that it's somewhere where you know to check it and you know that that information's safe. And both parents and students can have access to that. Oh. Also proofread everything you send. Please don't use abbreviations. I'm a fan of the LOL, totally. But if you LOL at me in an email, I'm going to LOL right back. Please do not put any sort of abbreviation. Please capitalize your I's and spell out you if you're speaking to someone, like how are you? Y-O-U, not how are you, letter U. Please make sure that you're checking that. It's not technically your application, but it's a representation of you. And you want to make sure that every single thing you do when communicating with colleges puts you in the absolute best light possible. Tell us who you are when you email us, so make sure that even if we've talked 12 times, that you are saying, hi, Ms. Stevens, my name is Annie. I talked to you a couple months ago at the college fair. I had another question. Just remind us. We try to remember you as best we can, but I always tell students, I have over 3,000 applicants from my territory, so I can't remember everyone. I want to, but sometimes it's hard. My brain only can do so much with this caffeine that I put in it. Fill in the gaps on the application, so start thinking now about things that might be a question for us. You never want us to try to fill in those gaps and understand. So for example, if your GPA is kind of lower than you want, if you've got a semester where you didn't do well, address it on the application. Start thinking now about how you're going to talk about that. We don't mind you taking the adult route and owning up to something that maybe wasn't as good. We would prefer that over you trying to avoid it and hope we don't see that's on the application, because we're always going to see it. But if we have to guess why that is, why your grades are lower, or why you had a semester that didn't go well, or why your involvement in a club everything ended in sophomore year, those are things you don't want to know what I usually think when that happens. So you would rather explain it to me and fill in those gaps. Send everything in early. So your counselors have a whole lot of people that they are responsible for. If you ask for everything 2 days before a deadline, it's not going to make it to us in time. So this summer, start thinking now about what deadlines are going to be coming up throughout the fall. If you've got a November 1st deadline, you should request all your materials no later than mid-September. Okay? Sounds stressful? But you want to make sure that we get it in time, because we can't consider you for admission or for scholarships or for honors or for anything unless we have your info. Also confirm that everything was received. Typically, you can do it in some sort of online portal. So for UT, we've got what's called a VIP account. It's a vol in progress account, and you can check if you applied with the common application or if you applied with our application, whether or not we've received all your materials. Most schools have that, but if they don't, reach out to the admissions office. I would call them or email them and just say, hey, I'm just making sure that everything that you need for my application is there. I just want to make sure I don't need to circle back around and request it again. And that's going to lead to my last question. So when I'm talking about these conversations, it should always be the student that is having this conversation. I love talking to mamas, love talking to daddies. I'd prefer it only ever happens if it's something that directly impacts you. So typically finances, that comes later in the application cycle. But if a mom's calling me about their student's application because they're in the middle of filling it out, which happened 4 times this application cycle, I had 4 separate parents who very openly told me they were in the middle of applying to college for their kid. which I had to stop them and say, ethically, I cannot hear any more of this. If that's the conversation, that's not okay. A lot of parents think of the application process as the last major event of their student's childhood. You want to make sure that you send them on their way and they're going to be okay. It's not the last major part of childhood, it's the first major event in adulthood, okay? You are not going to be on that campus with them for 4 years, hopefully. You're not going to be the one submitting their homework or talking to their professors, hopefully. So in this process, we want the student to be the one communicating. Again, if it's something with finances, if you're the one paying for their college, we understand that's a conversation you need to have with us. But if you're trying to make sure that everything's in, the student needs to be reaching out every single time. All right, and that is the end of the presentation. Do I have any more questions? How did I do on time? I'm really curious. I didn't even check. Is it 6:30? Oh, I'm sorry, Annie, I went over a little bit. I'm a chitter-chatterer. Okay, well, if you think of any questions, let me give you all my email address really quick. My name is Sammy Stevens, S-A-M-M-Y. Stevens with a V. You can tell all your friends I am a female. Not a little bold man. A lot of people think I am. And my email address is sammy@utk.edu. I'm based, like I said, here in Nashville. If you have any questions, it makes my job a lot more fun to meet people for coffee. If you couldn't tell, I love it. But just to sit down and talk about the process. It doesn't have to be about UT's process, although I would love that as well. But if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out to me. .edu. Yeah, sammy@utk.edu. Nope. It used to be, and then I changed it to something easier. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so we're just going to go straight on into Miss Annie Trout from TSAC, who's going to talk about how now you're going to pay for this wonderful college experience.
Well, hey guys, my name is Annie Trout, and I work with the Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation, and I've had a little bit less caffeine than Sammy, so hopefully I won't bore you too much talking about money and all the financial aid stuff. So we're basically just going to hit the high notes tonight. You guys should have copies of the presentation. There were some on the back table. If we ran out, I'm more than happy to get you guys copies. You can email me, and I'll be sure to forward those to you. But I typically come back, or someone from my office will come back in the fall semester, and then that's when we get really detailed and go into all that FAFSA goodness that comes about your senior year. So tonight, we just kind of wanted to hit those high notes for you. Sammy did a lot of this, but just kind of to pull out that senior year kind of timeline or checklist from a financial aid perspective. These are kind of the things that you want to be doing. So in the fall semester, you know, like she said, retaking that ACT, SAT, you know, for that ACT, sometimes if you just get it up 1 point, that could be an additional $1,000 in scholarships. So definitely looking to do that. Applying to those colleges, we recommend that you submit your college applications by Halloween of your senior year. Why do we say Halloween? Because that first big round of scholarship deadlines for colleges typically start November 1st. So that kind of gives you a good sense, especially for our Tennessee colleges, that you've met those deadlines. But again, like she said, make sure you're communicating with those college admissions reps from those schools that you're interested in, so you know specifically when those deadlines are. FAFSA will come up. We've moved that from the spring semester into the fall semester. This was our first year doing that. So October 1st of your senior year is that first opportunity to submit that free application for federal student aid. And even if you don't think you'll qualify for need-based aid, a lot of colleges and universities are looking for that FAFSA information just as part of their scholarship applications. We use it for our Hope Scholarship here in Tennessee. So if you're going to a Tennessee school and you want that Hope Scholarship, even though there's no income requirement with that, we still have to have your FAFSA information. That is the only application for the Hope Scholarship. Spring semester is typically when a lot of those local and private scholarships really start rolling in. So make sure that you know where your counselors are posting that information. Listen, if you guys go to graduation or senior night here, listen to those scholarships that the seniors this year are getting, and start investigating and seeing kind of what they had to do to get that. What kind of application process did they go through to receive that scholarship and to apply for that? So look for that information. Typically about this time of year, as Sammy said, May 1st is typically college signing day, so that's when you need to let the schools know if you accept their scholarships and you're going to their schools. So typically about mid-March to early April is really when those financial aid packages really start rolling in from those colleges and universities. And so we'll talk a little bit about cost of attendance and everything in a second, but that's when you can really, if you're going to sit down and make a decision based on college costs, this would be the time that you'd be able to do that. This is when you would have most of that information and be able to make those decisions. When you talk about financial aid, you have to talk about cost of attendance. And when you're talking to these colleges and these reps and you're taking these campus tours, make sure that you look and see what that cost of attendance is for that college campus. Every college in the United States has to publish that cost of attendance number, and you can basically think about that as your student budget. If you were to win the lottery before you sent your student off to college next fall, and so you were just going to write them a check so they could cover all of their expenses for that freshman year of college, this would be the dollar amount that you could put on that check, that they wouldn't have to ask you for one more penny while they were at that college. So that's what your your cost of attendance is. So it's composed of two different types of costs. So you've got your direct costs and your indirect costs. And so you can think about those direct costs as what you would see on the bill. So when they send you that bill for your student to be a student on that campus, the direct cost is what you're going to pay. So the tuition, the fees, if your student lives on campus, it would include their room and their board. So that would be your direct cost. Not very much wiggle room when it comes to that direct cost. The indirect costs are going to be those costs that your student will incur as they go throughout that school year being a student on that campus. So these are the things that you don't see on the bill. So your books and supplies, transportation costs, how are you going to get back and forth from that college or from your house to that college or university? So that would be included. They'll even usually put in a little bit of wiggle room, some miscellaneous expenses. If any of those unexpected needs arise, they'll have money there to be able to assist those as well. So this is just kind of giving you an estimate of what those cost of attendance numbers look like right now. So you can see we've kind of added all those in for the different types of colleges, the two-year public schools, those community colleges, the Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology, four-year publics, UT Knoxville, MTSU, the University of Memphis would be included there. And then, of course, private schools, out-of-state schools. We know those have a little bit bigger cost of attendance, and so we have those numbers represented for you as well. The bolded numbers are going to be the direct cost. So this is what you would expect to see on that bill per year from that college or university. And so then at the bottom, you've got that big cost of attendance number adding up all those other expenses. The good news about that larger number, that big cost of attendance, including all those other expenses that your student has, is that that's the dollar amount that they can get financial aid up to at that college or university. So they could get scholarships, they could get grants, they could, please don't let them, they could get student loans up to that cost of attendance to attend that college or university. So at that point, they will have the money then to pay that bill and then have some money coming back to them to use those for their books and supplies and other expenses. So what we want to try and make you do by exploring all those different financial aid sources is, again, try and get that direct cost, that bill taken care of for you through those scholarships and grant programs. And then again, hopefully you'll go over that cost of attendance or that direct cost, and you'll have some of that money coming back to you to use it for those other expenses your student will have. So the places we think it's most important for you guys to start looking for these financial aid dollars is, of course, that college or university. And so when you're taking those campus visits, make sure that you're talking to the admissions staff about the financial or the scholarship opportunities for those colleges. Again, make sure you know those deadlines. These are typically the first scholarship deadlines. They're going to hit your student their senior year of high school, so make sure that you know when those are. A lot of college campuses now actually have scholarship offices, so if you take those visits, you want to find out if that college has one. You want to know where that is, maybe walk your student there so you know that they know where that scholarship office is. This is an office where they actually hire staff to sit in there Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 and to find scholarships for students on that college campus. So again, it's probably one of the best places your student can know of on campus. This process doesn't stop just when they graduate high school. So when they get to that college, they, again, want to keep looking for those scholarship opportunities on that college campus. If your school doesn't have a scholarship office, oftentimes they'll have a scholarship coordinator within that financial aid office, and that's their job as well. So again, a great person for your student to know on that college campus. Again, those private scholarships, and so these are going to be the ones that come from the local community. It could come from the parent or the student's place of employment. A lot of times employers might offer some type of scholarship or discounted tuition rates or reimbursement programs, local banks, churches. There's some great places, and like they said, you've got some websites in your bulletin that will tell you different places to look for scholarships. Any of these local scholarships, any of these private scholarships that your student receives is just going to stack on top of that money from the college or university. So again, you want to make sure that we're exploring all those different resources. And then the last two sources, of course, the what I like to call your government money. So that federal financial aid and the state financial aid, oftentimes these are probably the easiest for you to apply to because there's really that one main application for most of these programs. That free application for federal student aid, that FAFSA is going to be your application for all your federal programs, and we use it for a majority of our state financial aid programs as well. One thing to keep in mind, if you are looking at out-of-state colleges, unfortunately, that means your state financial aid is going away. Our Tennessee financial aid programs will only work at colleges within the state of Tennessee. They won't work. Sammy mentioned Western Kentucky. You cannot take your Hope Scholarship to Western Kentucky. It has to be a school within the state of Tennessee. What we encourage students to do, if you are looking at a state, definitely have that conversation with those colleges and universities. Let them know that you're giving up big scholarship dollars, $3,000, $4,000 a year in your Hope Scholarship to look at those out-of-state schools. Some schools, like Western Kentucky, have discounted tuition rates for students coming from this area. They have some ways to compensate for you guys missing out on those scholarship dollars. So talk to that college, see what they can offer you, see if there's any extra additional money they might be able to offer because you are giving up something to look at their school. But know that none of our official state aid will go with you outside the state of Tennessee. The FAFSA, again, that big application for that government money that's out there. FAFSA stands again for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. If you're a junior this year, the FAFSA will open next year on October 1st. So that'll be your first opportunity to complete the FAFSA. You always do the FAFSA for the year that you'll be in college, so that'll be the 18-19 FAFSA that will open then. Website is up here. It should be in all of your information that you get from colleges and universities, anything you get from the counseling office, anything that you see from us at TSAC. You want to remember that website is www.fafsa.gov. You're applying for that government money, so it's got that .gov ending. There is a FAFSA.com, there's a FAFSA.org. Pretty much any ending that you can put behind FAFSA, you'll come to a lookalike site. They're going to ask a lot of personal information about yourself and about your family. And then when you get to that last question on that FAFSA, it's going to ask you for a credit card to charge you $60, $70, sometimes over $100 to complete that application. That first F in FAFSA stands for free, so you should never be paying a website to submit that FAFSA information for you. We have tons of free help here in Tennessee, so you don't have to pay anyone for that help. I go around, I do FAFSAs all year long, so I can help you with FAFSAs. If you just have a general question, you can always contact me. I'll be happy to answer those questions for you. The colleges here in Tennessee do a great job of offering FAFSA workshops. Columbia State here in Williamson County, I know, has some opportunities to go to a FAFSA workshop if you want that one-on-one help. So there's lots of good help for you in completing that FAFSA. You will need what's called an FSA ID. Your FSA ID is a username and password combination. You could go ahead and create your FSA ID tonight if you wanted to torture yourself maybe. It's probably the least fun part of the FAFSA. The actual application has gotten a lot easier, but the FSA ID is absolutely no fun. Please, if you do that, and we recommend you do it before you do your FAFSA, but when you do that, please make sure that you're writing down everything that it asks you. So it's going to ask you for an email address. You will have to have 2 FSA IDs per FAFSA, so you'll have to have 2 separate email addresses, a parent email address and a student email address. The password has to have the uppercase, lowercase numbers, special characters, be a certain length, so that can get confusing. There's 5 challenge questions that you have to come up with. You even have to come up with your own challenge questions at one point. So please make sure you write everything down, because the worst part, even worse than creating that FSA ID, is, yes, trying to go back in and get it reset once you've lost some of that information. So please make sure you write all that down. Needless to say, if you do start it and you have issues, you can call me. I'll help you as much as I can if you do get to a part where you're getting those dreaded error messages. Yes, ma'am? No. It's limited. You have a time limit, so you've got to do it all within a short amount of time. Yes, sir. For the Hope Scholarship, that's the deadline. We don't advertise the Hope Scholarship deadline because it's already when they're in college. So, did their freshman year, yes. Oh no, they want to apply for the Hope Scholarship on October 1st. There's not necessarily an application deadline. We technically have a deadline, but we don't promote it because it is so far in advance. We want you to do your FAFSA in October. The September 1st is the official state deadline for your Hope Scholarship. It would be September of 2018. But do not do it then, because your Hope Scholarship will not be at your college anymore. Yes, ma'am. The FAFSA is for the entire United States. So I would definitely encourage you to go ahead and just do that FAFSA. There's not a separate application for your Hope Scholarship. Yes, private schools, as long as they're regionally accredited. So Lipscomb, Belmont, Lee, Martin Methodist, all of those, good to go. Yes, ma'am. Yes. I mean, some schools will want you to do that. Some colleges will want students, all their students, to complete the FAFSA. Even if you know that you are not going to qualify for any of the need-based money, they still want you to fill out the FAFSA, and it's just part of that scholarship process. So, again, that's something to talk to those different colleges about. I would encourage you to, yes. No, the FAFSA, in its simplest form, the FAFSA would be the application for the Pell Grant. So the FAFSA is your application for all of the federal money. The actual FAFSA actually takes about 20 minutes. Right. Yes, ma'am. So students, if you have a 21 on your ACT, which we'll get to in a second, those qualifications. If you have a 21 on your ACT, which is what you need for your Hope Scholarship, typically, students have taken that as a junior and they've already scored that 21. Congratulations, you've got your Hope Scholarship. So after we get your FAFSA information, those letters usually start going out in January to early February. Sometimes a little bit later, but you should receive notification earlier. If we're waiting for your GPA, you're not going to receive notification of that until after you graduate high school. Correct. I mean, if you go to the FAFSA website, there will be a FAFSA there, but it will not be the FAFSA that you need to complete. So on October 1st, that 2018-19 FAFSA will pop up. It's a whole new page, a whole new application will come up on that screen. Yes, ma'am. There you go. So the information, that you need to complete that FAFSA, and you can go, if you need to know about the asset information, you can go to the Federal Student Aid website. You can Google what asset information do I need for FAFSA. I will typically come back in the fall, I think like I said earlier, and we do kind of a more in-depth FAFSA heavy presentation. We'll have that information then as well, kind of what assets go on there, what doesn't. But basically the information that you need for that FAFSA, you got to have the student social security number for the students and the parents. Of course, this is a government application, so they're going to make sure, they're going to do a check with the Social Security Administration, make sure that you are a real person before they give you any of their financial aid dollars. So we've got to have those Social Security numbers, student driver's license number. We encourage them to put those on there. Some of those Tennessee schools especially will use that information to verify that they're a Tennessee resident. So that's one less step that you have to do in providing additional information to that college. You will use your 2016 tax information, so those taxes that you're just doing or you're just about to do. Those are the information that you will use. There is no more updating. This is the information that your FAFSA will be calculated on. So you want to use that 2016 tax information. So keep those 1040s handy. If your students had a job, if your students filing 2016 taxes, you want to keep their W-2s or their 1040s handy as well, because their information will go on there. Untaxed income will go on there, so child support paid or received, information like that would go on there. And then some of us are lucky enough to list our investments and our assets. So we always encourage students and parents to have an idea of what their checking and savings account balance is. We tell them to kind of think about an average or that last day before payday. We encourage them, after all the bills have been paid, about how much money is in those checking and savings accounts at that point to list on there. If you own a business with more than 100 employees, you will list that information as an asset. Investment farms, so farms that you don't live on, would be listed on that FAFSA as an asset as well. The Hope Scholarship is just a flat amount. Well, Hope Scholarship, you need a 21 on your ACT or a 3.0 GPA. We'll give you $1,500 a semester at a community college. You'll get $1,750 a semester at a four-year school. Once everybody gets to be juniors or seniors at those four-year schools, so whether you've transferred in from the community college or you've progressed up through that four-year school to be a junior or senior, if you are still Hope eligible, meaning basically you have a 3.0 college GPA, then you will get $2,250 a semester from that point. There are two supplements that go along with the Hope Scholarship. You can find those in your brochure. The Aspire supplement is need-based. We give additional monies to students whose parents' adjusted gross income is reported on that FAFSA is less than $36,000 a year. There's another one called the GAMS, the General Assembly Merit Supplement. That's for students that have those high academics, so a 29 on your ACT and a 3.75 GPA. You'll get some additional money as well with that basic Hope Scholarship. Wilder Navy Technical Skills Grants for those students that want to go learn that skill or trade. So you can go to any of our 27 Tennessee College of Applied Technologies here in Tennessee, and we'll give you $2,000 per academic year to go learn that skill or trade. Parents, this one's for you as well. This is for all Tennesseans. So if you want a career change or you want to learn a skill or trade, this one is available to you guys as well. TSAA, that's our state grant program. So that one's going to be completely based on financial need. If you're EFC, which is that number from the FAFSA that's generated from completing the FAFSA, you can think about it as all the colleges have their cost of attendance. Each student has their EFC, so their expected family contribution, and then the difference is their financial need. So the college will look for scholarships, they'll look for grants, and lastly, they'll look for student loans to meet that student's need. So TSAA would be that state grant. If your EFC falls between 0 and 2,100, then you're eligible to qualify for it. Next year's FAFSA deadline for state money is January 16th. So you need to have your FAFSA completed by January 16th to qualify for that TSAA. Yes, ma'am. The General Assembly Merit Scholarship. The college financial aid office, so their financial aid staff will see the FAFSA information. Yes. Yes, sir. So juniors would start next year when you're a senior, October 1st, that FAFSA opens. So that's when you'll start completing that application. We encourage, do it before the holidays. I mean, really. Yes. Yeah. So, yes. So October 1st, get that FAFSA done. Some of that aid is first come, first serve. So that's why we encourage you to get that taken care of as soon as you can after October 1st. All that state money again goes on top of that Pell or on top of that federal money. So we've got some of that federal information for you. You can see that Pell grant, that EFC, that expected family contribution is a little bit higher there. So 0 to 5234 means you're eligible for that Pell grant. Next year, Pell grant for students would be $5,920 a year. Yes, ma'am. Right. You have to do it every year that your student is in college, and you'll start your senior year. The FAFSA opens on October 1st. Yes, ma'am. So Tennessee Promise, just quickly to go through some of those requirements. Sammy talked about this a little bit. So Tennessee Promise is our one of our newer programs. So any Tennessee high school student is eligible for their first 2 years tuition and mandatory fee free. We don't care how much your mama makes or your daddy makes. We don't care what your GPA is or what your ACT score is. If you can show us that you're a responsible student and you're serious about going to college, then we can guarantee you those 2 years of tuition and mandatory fee-free community college or Tennessee College of Applied Technology. How do you show us that you're serious about going to college and you're a responsible student? We're going to ask you to meet some deadlines for us. And so that first deadline that you have to do is you have to submit an application to be part of the program. And so August 1st, that Tennessee Promise application will open. That window will close on November 1st. Even if you're, like Sammy said earlier, your safety school is Harvard and Yale, and before you came tonight, you got off the phone talking to them about their full ride scholarships for your freshman year of college, I'm still going to tell you to sit down and complete that Tennessee Promise application. Like she said, it doesn't hurt you to go through those steps. Just because you submit an application does not mean you have to go use that scholarship. You can still go wherever you want. We still want you to pursue whatever college it is that is of your dreams. But it's always good to have a backup plan. It's good to have a backup plan. So we still encourage you to meet these deadlines. The first thing, or the only thing really that's kind of out of the ordinary for students that are going to another college, you should be doing all these steps anyway. The only thing that's kind of out of whack there is going to be that application. So we still encourage you, sit down, do that application. If you don't and something happens and it gets to be June 15th after high school graduation and you just can't go off to that college that you had dreamed of for whatever reason, you fall in love or you break your leg, whatever happens, if you had submitted that Tennessee Promise application, if you'd followed those steps, then you could still go to Columbia State or one of those TCATs tuition free. So again, make sure it's a good backup plan. So we want to submit that application by November 1st. It's your first step. Second step, you want to do that FAFSA. You've got to have that completed by our state deadline. Again, January 16th for 2018 is that state deadline next year. You do have to attend one mandatory meeting held by Tennessee Achieves. It's usually in the spring semester, March to early April. The student must be here. Parents are invited to attend, but it's absolutely mandatory for the student. They talk to them about bridging the gap between high school and college, so it is good information, again, no matter what college you're going to. The last thing the student has to do is they have to do 8 hours of community service for every semester they receive the award. So that first bout of community service for that fall semester of their freshman year, it starts on November 2nd and it ends July 1st. So you have to do 8 hours during that time window. Lots of things count for community service. You can job shadow. I know your students are very involved in their community here through their clubs and activities that they participate in here. If they're doing that community service, again, as long as it's within that window, they can double dip and use that for their Tennessee Promise hours as well. So, yes, ma'am. The only things that you can't do is you cannot, it can't be for a family member. It cannot be paid. This is not volunteer work if you're getting paid for it. And you cannot proselytize. Anything else is counted. Yes, ma'am. It's only a community college or a Tennessee College of Applied Technology. Now, there are some four-year schools you can use it at, but you have to be enrolled in their associate degree program. And at a four-year school, it will not cover the full amount of the costs. It'll basically only guarantee you whatever you would get at a community college. So Tennessee Promise is a last dollar scholarship. So that means that we're going to apply some money to your student's account before Tennessee Promise pays any money in their account. So the three things that we're going to put in your student's account before Tennessee Promise goes in is what I like to call your free government money. So your Hope Scholarship, your Pell Grant, and your state grant will be applied to that student's account before Tennessee Promise goes in. So we've got our three Tennessee Promise students up here, Student A, Student B, Student C. If you remember earlier, we said tuition and mandatory fees at a community college here in Tennessee was a little bit more than $4,000 per year. Because I'm terrible at math, I made it in my example a nice round number, so we're going to pretend that next year the tuition and fees were $4,000 flat at Columbia State. So we've got Student A, our Tennessee Promise students. Student A showed financial need. They were eligible for that full Pell Grant, eligible for their state grant, so they ended up getting $8,000 in that free government money. So does that student owe anything to that college or university? So in that situation, the student would not receive any financial benefit for that year from Tennessee Promise. Now, if something happened the next year and they remained eligible, they lost some of that grant money, then Tennessee Promise would come in and pick up those costs for the next year. Student B had a 21 on their ACT, so they were eligible for their Hope Scholarship, but didn't show financial need. So we put that $3,000 for that fall and spring semester into that student's account. They still owed about $1,000, so Tennessee Promise came in and covered that additional $1,000. And then Student C wasn't eligible for any, or didn't show any financial need. They weren't eligible for their Hope Scholarship. So Student C, Tennessee Promise would then cover their full amount of tuition and mandatory fees. Mm-hmm. No, that is a university. So we still encourage students, if you're going to do Tennessee Promise, make sure you're looking for those local scholarships and the scholarships to those community colleges or tech schools. That would go on top after Tennessee Promise paid. So again, you would have those direct costs taken care of through that Tennessee Promise to that community college or TCAT, and then those additional scholarships that you got would be that money that would come back to you for those indirect costs to buy those books and supplies to pay for those transportation costs. Does anybody have any questions for me? Yes, sir, ma'am. Yes, so as long as you're still Hope eligible, because you're going to use that Hope Scholarship at that community college as well. So as long as you kept those grades up and you were eligible to continue using it at the four-year school, would transfer with you. Yes. So it's definitely something to think about. A lot of the schools in Tennessee have done a great job of offering their transfer scholarships. Some of them have guaranteed transfer scholarships, and that's just based on their GPA. I always talk to a lot of students who maybe, we've got a really great GPA. We've got a 3.75 high school GPA, but I'm not a good test taker. I've taken that ACT. I can't get it up to those guaranteed scholarships for freshmen. So in that situation, you might get about the same or more scholarship money just basing it on that GPA from the college once you go into transferring. So that's definitely something to think about. But you definitely want to have those conversations with the colleges and definitely want to make sure that you're kind of planning everything out to make sure what's most affordable and what's the best option for you and your student. Well, if you're like me, I know I always think of the best questions on my way home from something like this. So if that's you too, please don't hesitate to call or email. Email is probably the best way to reach me. I can get back with you faster because I'm usually at something like this and not quite able to answer my phone. So if you'll shoot me an email, we'll definitely get back to you really quickly and let you get that question answered or let you know the best person to reach out to get that question answered. So thank you guys.
All right. Hopefully, Mr. Grimes is going to be coming down the aisle, and he's going to talk for a few minutes about college essays.
All right. Oh, holy mackerel, I'm hot. Okay. So I'm going to try to talk really quiet because apparently my volume's really loud. How's everybody doing this evening? Good. Okay, just a couple of things really quickly. First of all, I'm a walker, so Mr. Willoughby, you're back there operating the camera. I'm going to be moving around, so just prepare. Second thing, I tend to talk with my hands and I tend to talk really fast, so if either of those things tend to bother you, that's why I have a clipboard to keep me more sedate, but I will still talk fast, so just bear with me. I know that you guys have had a lot of information thrown at you. You're now wondering why in the world you had these children to pay for college for. But now that you are gone through the motions of admissions and you've gone through the motions of financial aid, now we're getting down to brass tacks and the application process. And in particular, we're talking about college essays. So I don't have a fancy PowerPoint. Like I said, I'm a creative type, so anything that's logistically organized doesn't work for me. So I'm sorry if I have your children in my class. But there are a couple of things that I want to make sure that you are aware of when it comes to the college essay process. And the first thing that you guys can do as students, so students, where are my students at? Wave your hands. All right. The first thing that I can tell you that is the most important thing comes from Kurt Vonnegut, author of Slaughterhouse-Five, Breakfast of Champions, really big into helping writers craft their art. And one of the things that he says, he's got 7 rules for writing. You can look them up, but the 7th one is the one that I consider the most important. And it says, pity the readers. And that's an odd piece of advice because the word pity makes it sound like it's something sad. No, it's really more than that. Think about it. You had somebody up here from UT talking about admissions. They read tons of essays. And so anything that stands out is going to work to your advantage because anything that's more mundane, anything that is more commonplace, anything that is just very broad, no matter how important it is to you, it's also important to the 400,000 people or however many you want to say that are applying at any given time. So you have to think about how do I stand out to the readers? And that first of all requires you to consider what they're reading. So I've got about 6 things that I tend to operate off of when I give advice. And please remember, I'm not affiliated with a college. I do not have any sort of admissions credentials. So I'm speaking entirely to you as an English teacher. These are the 6 things that I tend to tell people when I'm looking at college essays. All right? The first thing is to consider that there is a word count. So the word count typically is somewhere between 500 to 750 words, and that's there for a reason. It's not just to be precise with your words, but it's to be precise and meaningful. The biggest thing that happens is you either are a good writer, but you fluff up on style and there's no content. Or you want to put so much content in there that there's no real credible writing there, that it just comes across as a laundry list or very generic, jargon-sounding writing. So the big thing is to balance the two. You want about half content, half style. Because again, the college essay is a way for you to show, yes, I can write, but yes, I am also a person. The second thing to do is to start out with an introduction that is somehow captivating, that's innovative, but still applicable in the moment. So for instance, the two examples that I like to use, and because I'm a Vanderbilt person, I go to my alma mater. An admissions counselor, similar to the one you saw today, came and talked a little bit about a Vanderbilt essay she read back in 1998. Now, those of you that have been in Nashville for a while, you remember 1998, April or so, is the tornado that struck down and hit Nashville. She said that later that year, she had a student reading an essay from a student. It talked about being here, touring the campus, having to go into a shelter on Vanderbilt's campus, being stuck downstairs with professors and students and everything else, and how horrific the whole experience was. And then the next line was, "That's when I knew I wanted to go to Vanderbilt." So it's a little bit surprising, it's a little bit jarring, but there's something there. The way that you invert expectations is to show a different side of yourself that maybe even your parents or your best friends aren't really expecting when you put across this particular essay. The second example is one that I'm going to use from my own experience. When I was applying, to Vanderbilt, before they had the Common App, they had specific questions. And there's always that dreaded, why Vanderbilt? So I've thought about it, and I said, okay, so here was my opening. I've been a Vanderbilt season ticket holder for football since I was 6 years old. That's 12 years straight of being a dedicated football fan. That's 12 years straight of losing. 12 years of losing to UT, 12 years of losing to Kentucky, 12 years of losing to people that you've never even heard of. That's 12 long years. And Vanderbilt owes it to me to give me 4 more. And it worked, apparently. I managed to get in. They weren't turned off by it, or maybe they were, I don't know. But whatever the case is, it's something that stands out. And you still want to go through and sell yourself as a candidate, which is why item number 3, have a voice. If you don't have a voice, you are going to flop on this every single time. Because what you need to recognize is that not only is the college essay meant to be somewhat academic, because you are showing off your writing, you're also selling yourself. It's the only real chances, outside from some interviews, it's really the best chance that they have to see your personality. So if you are looking for something to really set you apart, your transcript's going to have your grades. You're going to have all these listings on your resume of how great you are at community service and all the things that you've done to prepare for a college institution. But remember, colleges are looking for diverse populations. Colleges are looking for why you're a good fit too. So you have to show them something. If you don't show them something, then you're basically giving them just another blank canvas amongst a series of them. So you have to take that into consideration. Number 4, and I apologize for my awkward flipping right here. Number 4, this one is probably the most controversial that I tell my students. So I'm going to just really quickly poll the audience, adults and students. How many of you have been on some sort of church trip or mission trip or community service project that made a lasting impact on your life? Of some sort. All right, now kind of look around the room at all the hands that are up. It's about half of the crowd. I'm going to tell you right now, unless you've got something new to say, don't use it. Because you have to somehow spark that ingenuity. And so what tends to happen is that people use those sorts of examples to show they are a good person. No college person is thinking that you're a bad person upon applying. Except maybe you, Bella. I know Bella, I can tease her a little bit. Okay. So no college admissions officer is thinking automatically that you're a bad person, especially if you've got all these things listed about community service and everything else. So the why is what matters. And if you can't articulate the why, then you don't need to write about it. I've had many different students come to me and they write that particular essay. And I look at them and I go, what do you want to say? They'll tell me exactly back and I'll say, that's not what you're saying. What you're showing to me is that you want to be a good person and you want to show them how good of a person you are. Or the same thing with academic challenges. There's usually a college app essay that tends to gear on, tell us about a challenge that you've overcome. And so a lot of people choose grades. It's a perfectly valid answer. But unless something that you did really strikes a nerve with you and you can speak passionately on it, and honestly about it, then that is maybe not the route to go either. Which leads me to number 5. In all instances, whatever you're choosing to do, you need to be honest, because if you're not being honest, you're not showing any sort of vulnerability. That doesn't mean like open up all these sore wounds and pour out all these weaknesses about yourself, but be honest about what you're writing about, and at the same time, while being honest, embellish. Just a little. Because you are telling a story. Most of these are personal essays of some variety. Now, whether those are really long essays, no, they're going to be shortened and cut down to about 500 to 750 words, but it still is a narrative. You're still unfolding something about yourself. So the more that you can do that, and the more that you can hold interest, the better off you tend to be. And then number 6, get someone to look over your papers, absolutely. Your essays, absolutely 100%. But what I would say don't do not have 18 people look over your essay. Because then we have the issue of too many cooks in the kitchen. And I don't know about you, but my kitchen's pretty small. So if you're looking at this, 2 or 3 people, and what you need to do is go to an individual that you trust. Now, I trust Mrs. Holland up here. And I would go to her. But what I'm going to tell you is what students should say. Please take this essay and hack it within an inch of its life. Because if they're not willing to give it a legitimate look, then what they're going to do is either placate you and pat you on the back, or they're going to make wishy-washy suggestions but you know what's best to write. They need somebody to look at it. And they need to recognize it's a process. You don't write one college essay and be done with it. It's not a one and done. You have to make drafts. You have to go back and look at it again and again. Because then if you do have any sort of issues, you've cultivated it with an image of not only what you feel and believe, but also what others around you who truly know you also think about you and believe about you, so that you're giving a more comprehensive picture. We students, or anybody that's a writer, tends to have a little bit of tunnel vision. And it goes back to that first point. You've got to pity the readers. So in all instances, those are the big pieces of advice that I tend to tell my students. I don't necessarily have a silver bullet. I don't have any sort of suggestion about which essay option on the Common App should my student write about, because that's going to differ for each and every individual. But if one of them stands out, even if you think, ooh, that might be a little bit of a risk, take a risk. I think one of the things that we don't do is encourage enough risks. Now, that might flop, and you might look at them and say, let's try something else. Or students, you may look at something and say, oh, okay, I got to restart the whole thing. That's okay. That's why when they were talking to you, a lot of times teachers will say, start early. It's a pretty good piece of advice. So start during the summer and start looking at colleges during the summer, because some of them will have different essays that they want you to write supplementally. But the biggest thing is be willing to write for yourself and for others. You got to factor in everybody. So this is extremely important to you. It's also extremely important to them. Their job is to make sure that they have a completely diverse, wonderful incoming freshman class, and you need to show them why you fit in. So really quickly, I know that we've got to get to our panel in just a second. So I'll take it, if you have any questions at this second, at this juncture, specifically relating to essays. We will have a panel of parents, students, and others in just a moment to where you can ask more farther-reaching questions. But if you're looking from an English teacher's perspective, are there any questions from the floor really quickly? Yes?
Like on a Common App where it might go to several colleges, is it okay to use the same essay?
So because the Common App goes to all the colleges all at once, usually they'll ask open-ended questions that don't cater to any particular university. And so you want to keep your essay as open-ended as possible. So that's where you have to do a little bit of a juggling act, because you do have to recognize that I'm applying to Vanderbilt, I'm also applying to UTK, they're very distinctly different institutions. So you want to make sure that in those instances that you're trying to balance as best as possible what you think about that institution and what things you want to project to those institutions. So it's not the easiest job in the world, and that's why I say have a lot of people look at it, 3 to 4 that you really trust, because they can start to focus you and see what your message really is.